Welcome to the latest updates on the ongoing developments in the conflict between the US-Israel alliance and Iran on the wider Meaning channel. Dear viewers, the global power chessboard has been mercilessly overturned, while Tel Aviv and Washington are still frantically calculating the damage from the relentless rain of missiles tearing through the skies, from suicidal militia groups fighting for their faith. Then, from the east, gigantic, cold, and brutal military shadows have officially lifted the veil of night, stepping out of the darkness and crushing all ordinary diplomatic rules. China, the giant that has always chosen to hide and bide its time, has now officially drawn its sword, revealing itself with overwhelming killing intent. No more profound concerns or meaningless joint statements. Beijing has just delivered a thunderous, strategically devastating blow against the hegemonic ambitions of the US and Israel in the Gulf through an unprecedented heavy military equipment landing campaign to protect its ally Iran. Look at what is happening at Tehran's strategic ports. Massive steel blocks labeled Made in China are being unloaded amid the shock and helplessness of Western intelligence. But that is only the small, visible tip of a gigantic earthquake that is accumulating. A long-range ballistic supermissile, the ultimate monster of the war machine, has been deployed on launch platforms for the first time. This is not a weapon for interception. It is a weapon that decides the life and death of an entire world order. With the ability to reach any coordinate on American soil, it turns all of the Pentagon's defense shields from Alaska to Florida into outdated scrap iron, useless before the storm of destruction. But behind those fiery gun barrels lies a harsh, suffocating economic equation that Washington deliberately avoids. Why has Beijing chosen to tear apart its fake neutral shell and bet its entire prestige and military assets on the eye of the Iran storm? Is the dragon of the East's energy belt threatened to the point where it must launch a life-or-death strike? And more importantly, what will happen when China's super ballistic missile stationed on Iranian soil actually fires, aimed straight at the White House? Will that be the end of the unipolar hegemony era, opening a new multipolar order where Eastern powers rise, overwhelming and pushing the West into a bitter defensive position? Before we dive into the detailed analysis, please like and subscribe to the Wider Meaning channel so you don't miss any developments or cold, direct, and uncompromising analyses on global geopolitical shifts. And don't forget to leave your most meaningful comments for the 34 warriors in this righteous, proud, and fiery resistance. The Thunderous landing. China builds a fortress of death to protect Iran. The dawn at the Strait of Hormuz today no longer carries the red hue of sunlight, but the cold, deadly gray of war shadows surging from the east. While U.S. intelligence satellites are still busily scanning Iran's domestic missile launch sites in a state of complacency, a geopolitical shock has been delivered like a sledgehammer right at the strategic ports. Giant transport ships from the COSCO Corporation, under the tight escort of Type 52D destroyers, have begun unloading cargo that at first glance has caused military experts at the Pentagon to break into cold sweats. Their hearts are pounding from the level of danger. This is not humanitarian aid, nor is it disguised civilian commercial contracts. China has officially torn open the steel curtain, unleashing its full military weight and intelligence into the Middle East at a terrifying speed. Beijing no longer needs to hide and bide its time. They are openly building an impregnable steel fortress to shield Iran from any airstrikes by the US-Israel alliance. First and most importantly is the appearance of the long-range HQ-9B air defense systems, an extremely upgraded version considered a direct counter to Russia's S-400 and America's Patriot. But unlike the usual commercial versions, these HQ-9B systems deployed to Iran come with an entirely new, cold, and ruthless warbrain. The fire control system integrates artificial intelligence, AI, and active electronically scanned array, AESA, phased array radar, capable of detecting stealth ghosts, like the F-35 or B-2, from hundreds of kilometers away. Israel once prided itself on its F-35I fighters. Now, those fifth-generation jets will face a dense electromagnetic wall of fire, suffocating any chance of survival they have never experienced in any exercise. China is not just selling guns. It is exporting a complete top-tier war machine, operated by the logic of absolute destruction. These HQ-9B systems are directly connected to the Beidou satellite network, allowing Iran to establish an absolute no-fly zone, turning Tehran's skies into a fortress of death where anything that flies in without permission is wiped out. Any unauthorized flying object will be turned into burning scrap before it can even see its target. Not stopping at sky defense, Iran's ground is also being restructured into a fully steel-transformed battlefield. Hundreds of VT-4 main battle tanks, the pride of Norinco, have begun rolling on strategic routes toward the Israeli border with new-generation explosive reactive armor and a 125mm main gun capable of firing missiles through the barrel. The VT-4 is not just a killing machine, but a mobile fortress carrying the power to crush any attacking force. Look at how China deploys its troops. They are not sending outdated equipment to clear warehouses. What is landing in Iran is the supreme essence of Chinese military technology. From the PHL-16 multiple rocket launcher systems with terrifying range that can wipe out an entire military base in a single salvo, to remote-controlled combat robots and stealth reconnaissance UAVs. Beijing is turning the Middle East into a fierce war laboratory where all limits are broken. Why emphasize this event? Because behind every tank and every missile system is a tightly intertwined flow of energy and financial power. China pouring military equipment into Iran is a steel-hard affirmation. The renminbi will stake its position in the Middle East, directly challenging the US dollar. Beijing is protecting Iran as it protects its own giant oil reserves. They understand that if Iran collapses, the energy torrent flowing to the east will be cut off, and the Belt and Road dream will disintegrate in an instant. The Pentagon is trembling from losing control of the battlefield, not only because of the power of Chinese weapons, but because they realize they have lost the initiative on the chessboard. With heavy Chinese equipment present in Tehran, every attack plan by the US and Israel becomes outdated, risky, and borderline suicidal. Does America dare to fire on military complexes with Chinese experts present? The answer is a humiliating silence. But heavy equipment, tanks, or air defense missiles are only the prelude to a horrifying drama behind the scenes. China has made a move no one could have anticipated. Among those giant crates, people have discovered the appearance of a strategic shadow, a superweapon never before revealed, with the ability to penetrate all American defense layers. What is it? Why does it make the entire US military establishment tremble and feel uneasy to the core? We will decode this mystery right in the next part. The Intercontinental supermissile delivers a direct blow to America from Iranian territory. Dear viewers, if the VT-4 tanks or HQ-9B air defense systems in the previous part are considered the outer steel armor for protection, then in this part, China has officially drawn its sharpest, coldest sword, carrying the will of absolute dominance. Do not confuse this with the conventional medium-range missiles that Iran often uses to strike Israel. What is now heavily and threateningly positioned on mobile launchers in Iran's strategic mountain regions is an entirely different entity. An intercontinental ballistic supermissile, ICBM, a special tactical variant, never before revealed to the public. This is the top-secret trump card that Beijing has never acknowledged in its annual reports. But now it is materializing defiantly, standing tall in the heart of the Middle East firestorm. Analysts assess that this is not just a weapon. It is a death sentence hanging over the artificial order that Washington is desperately trying to maintain. Look at the technical specifications to see the clear helplessness of the West. This supermissile, temporarily called the DF-27 variant, is the ultimate destroyer, with a speed that even the Pentagon's most powerful supercomputers freeze when calculating interception trajectories. With a speed exceeding Mach 10, that is, more than 10 times the speed of sound, it does not just fly, it tears through the atmosphere with terrifying power. But speed is only half the story. What keeps U.S. Strategic Command, STRATCOM generals awake in panic is its ability to change trajectory in illogical ways, beyond any calculation model. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow predictable parabolic paths, this Chinese masterpiece uses a hypersonic glide vehicle, HGV, that allows it to perform sharp turns, swooping and gliding like a ghost on the edge of the atmosphere to evade even the most modern Aegis or THAAD fire nets. In practical combat terms, America is trying to catch a lightning bolt with a torn net. Their radar systems may see it, but by the time the interception launch order is issued, the target is already in a completely different coordinate. This is the chain collapse of the entire missile defense doctrine into which Washington has poured trillions of dollars. Why is its appearance in Iran a disaster for Washington? The answer lies in two words: absolute range, with the ability to reach over 12,000 kilometers. Placing this missile in Iran means the entire U.S. territory, from financial centers in New York, government buildings in Washington, to naval bases in San Diego, is locked within destruction range. China has executed a supreme strategic besiege, the point to annihilate reinforcements move. They do not need to bring missiles close to the U.S. border. By equipping their ally Iran with this doomsday weapon, Beijing has turned Iran into a super long-range forward base, ready to deliver a strike at any time. Now, every move by America in the Middle East must be paid for with the security of its own homeland. Every time an American aircraft carrier approaches the Gulf, Washington must face the risk of a hypersonic warhead plunging straight toward the White House in less than 30 minutes from launch. For the first time since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, the American people truly feel the cold breath of death hanging right above their heads. But unlike 1962, this time their opponent is not a Soviet Union weakened economically, but a vibrant China with nearly infinite financial and technological potential. The presence of this super missile is not only aimed at military targets, it is a direct blow to the stability of the petrodollar system. When a weapon capable of wiping out Washington in the blink of an eye appears, America's role as security guarantor in the Middle East is immediately shattered. Oil-producing nations will begin to wonder whether they should continue relying on a superpower directly threatened at home or join hands with the Russia-China-Iran alliance holding the most advanced destructive tools on the planet. The shift in investment capital flows and the decline in confidence in U.S. Treasury bonds will unfold like an unstoppable financial flood. China is using steel to break the dollar and firepower to burn America's international prestige on the global chessboard. The appearance of this super missile in the Middle East theater is not accidental. It is a cold ultimatum that Beijing sends directly to Washington. Stop before it is too late. The only way out for America now is not to send more troops, but to accept the bitter truth that the unipolar hegemony era has ended. The battlefield is set. The launchers in Iran have been loaded with destructive power. Coordinates in America have been programmed into the missile's electronic brain. The world is holding its breath in extreme tension, watching every launch button. The arrogance of America and Israel has pushed them into a trap where the price to pay is not only soldiers in the field, but the survival of an entire empire. However, no matter how powerful a weapon is, it needs a reason to fire. Why has Beijing chosen this moment to unleash its most dangerous trump card? Behind those fiery gun barrels lies a secret strategic pact, an alliance bound by vital interests and the flow of oil. The truth about what Washington calls the axis of evil will be brutally exposed right after this. The ultimate covenant. Why China chooses Iran as its fortress. In the world of true power holders, no compromise is free, and unconditional goodwill does not exist. China pouring waves of heavy equipment and ballistic super missiles into Iran is not simply a military support action. Behind the smoke and fire shell is a life-and-death contract, a fateful symbiosis, written in interests and absolute power between the world's largest industrial workshop and the strategic oil transfer station of the world. Beijing is not only protecting a nation, it is directly protecting the vital lifeline of the Chinese empire itself in the 21st century. Look at the harsh reality of the Chinese economy, an industrial monster with terrifying energy consumption. Every day, Beijing needs tens of millions of barrels of oil to keep its machines from stalling, and Iran is the most stable energy source that the West cannot completely strangle. The 5-year cooperation agreement, worth $400 billion between the two countries, is not just numbers on paper. It is a strategic oath ensuring Iranian oil flows to the east, regardless of any sanctions from Washington. For Beijing, Iran is an impregnable refueling station on the global energy chessboard. If Iran collapses, if Tehran falls into the hands of a pro-US regime, the energy noose around China's neck will tighten until it suffocates. Therefore, sending missiles to Iran is essentially Beijing building a steel wall to protect its own economic future. Iran possesses a geographic position likened to the eye of the Asia-Europe storm. It is the most important transit node in China's grand One Belt, One Road project. From Iran, Beijing can extend its strategic arm to Turkey, straight into Europe, and strangle America's influence in Central Asia. Let's analyze Beijing's besiege, the point to annihilate reinforcements tactic. By turning Iran into an impregnable fortress, China has created an extremely large strategic buffer zone. When America has to pour all its attention and military resources into the Middle East to deal with Iran, On other fronts, like the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait, the pressure on Beijing will decrease significantly. China is using the Iran pawn to pin down, wear down, and exhaust the American giant in a quagmire with no escape, creating conditions for the Eastern Dragon to quietly reshape the new multipolar order. This is the most vital strategic blow in this blood covenant. Since World War II, America's hegemonic power has rested on a single pillar. Oil must be bought with the US dollar, the petrodollar. But Iran and China have joined hands to smash that iron rule. Billions of barrels of oil are now being paid for in renminbi. The presence of Chinese military forces in Iran is a cold power statement to other Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia or the UAE that they no longer need to fear America. China has weapons, hypersonic missiles, and is ready to protect anyone who dares to abandon the US dollar. This is a global-scale financial coup protected by cutting-edge military firepower. Beijing is using steel to hammer the renminbi's position into the world's energy bloodstream, making the US dollar waver right in the oil fields that were once its holy land. Beijing has been very sophisticated in playing the role of savior for Iran, while this nation is being cornered by the West. But the price of that salvation is that Iran becomes a strategic military outpost for China. This is a ruthless symbiotic relationship. Iran receives security and technology, while China receives long-term strategic dominance and energy. Washington looks at this covenant with bitter helplessness. They realize that decades of sanctions have only pushed Iran faster into China's arms. Beijing has not only won militarily, it has gained absolute superiority in geopolitical vision. When Chinese missiles are placed on Iranian soil, America's red lines have been erased without a trace. Now, every U.S. diplomatic effort in the Middle East must go through Beijing's nod. The blood covenant has been sealed with super missile systems and burning oil pipelines. But the question is, will America and Israel sit still and watch this order collapse? Or will they choose a reckless, ultimately destructive way out to salvage their position? The bitter truth about Washington's impasse will be laid bare right after this. America falls into a dead end as its muscles collapse before the superweapon. For nearly a century, the world has grown too accustomed to the image of America, playing the role of global policeman, using its muscular power to decide the fate of any nation that dares to go against the interests of the USD. But today, in the Middle East firestorm, the muscular bloc that once inspired global terror is trembling and showing clear signs of exhaustion. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, Washington realizes that its aircraft carrier strike groups worth tens of billions of dollars or its most elite Marine brigades are becoming outdated and powerless before a geopolitical situation that has fundamentally changed. What way out does America have when the opponent is no longer AK-wielding insurgent groups, but a military superpower with technology on par with, or even superior in, America's own critical weaknesses? Look straight at the bitter truth. America's deterrence doctrine is based on the premise that no one dares attack them because the price is destruction. But when China places ballistic super missiles in Iran, weapons that can land on Washington, D.C. in less than 30 minutes, the deterrence balance has been brutally reversed. America is no longer the only one capable of destroying the opponent. Now, they themselves are placed in the position of a geopolitical hostage, locked in the crosshairs. The Pentagon is falling into a terrifying psychological trap. If they order strikes on Iran to save Israel, they will face the risk of a full-scale nuclear war with China. If they sit quietly and watch Chinese equipment pour in, America's global prestige will collapse in a chain reaction before its allies' eyes. Washington stands before an abyss of helplessness, where every choice leads to a terrible outcome. For many decades, aircraft carriers have been the symbol of America's ocean-dominating power. But the appearance of long-range anti-ship missiles and phased-array radar systems from China in Iran has turned these floating fortresses into giant targets waiting to be hunted. U.S. generals fully understand that in a conflict scenario, carrier strike groups like the USS Gerald R. Ford or USS Dwight D. Eisenhower will be saturated by thousands of cruise missiles and suicide UAVs before they can react. The so-called freedom of navigation that America always boasts about is now just an empty slogan exposed right in the Gulf. America cannot even protect itself within range of Chinese super missiles. So what do they have to protect their allies with? This impasse forces strategists at West Point to acknowledge a harsh truth. The era of gunboat diplomacy has officially ended. America is holding a cracked shield against a cold, hypersonic sword. In politics, nothing is more ruthless than seeing allies turn their backs. When they realize America no longer has enough strength to suppress China and Iran, Arab nations that were once America's backyard begin quietly pivoting, expanding cooperation doors with Beijing. They do not want to be dragged into a war that America cannot win. Washington sees this, but is completely powerless. They no longer have enough financial resources to buy loyalty as before, and their military power is pinned down by the super missile threat. The only way out for America at this moment is a humiliating diplomatic agreement, a retreat in order to preserve what remains of the empire. But the deep-rooted arrogance of Washington's elite does not allow them to do that, and this rigidity is dragging them deeper into the quagmire. Never forget that America maintains a strong military thanks to the position of the US dollar. But when China uses military equipment to sponsor oil transactions in renminbi in Iran, they have directly cut the financial lifeline of America's war machine. The deeper America sinks into conflict, the more its public debt skyrockets, and confidence in the greenback erodes faster. This is a multi-layered war of attrition. China does not need to fire a single shot at America to win. They only need to maintain their military presence in Iran long enough for the world to realize that America is no longer the sole master. The presence of Chinese super missiles is an affirmation. The petrodollar era has entered an irreversible end. Washington is witnessing the foundations of its empire being drilled away by tools named Eastern technology and finance. So what is the way out for America? Will they choose an all-in desperate war or have to sit at the negotiation table from a position of inferiority? In reality, geopolitics shows that America is being cornered into a narrow corner of history. Every effort to sanction Iran or contain China has failed miserably. Beijing has calculated very carefully. They do not push America to the wall to trigger a nuclear war, but they tighten the noose enough to force Washington to concede step by step. America's way out now does not lie in gun barrels, but in acknowledging the failure of the unipolar doctrine. That is a bitter pill Washington must swallow if it does not want to see the White House erased from the map just because of a miscalculation in the Gulf. America's impasse is clear, but what about Israel? This nation has long considered itself impregnable in the heart of the Middle East, thanks to Washington's absolute protection. When the big brother is trembling before Chinese super missiles, Tel Aviv will have to face a harsh reality it has never experienced. What will their million-dollar missile shields become before the overwhelming pressure from rising Eastern technology? Israel collapses under the shadow of Eastern technology. For many decades, Israel has built an image of an impenetrable technological fortress. With absolute backing from Silicon Valley and massive military aid from Washington, Tel Aviv is confident that it possesses the world's most modern missile shields, from the short-range Iron Dome, the medium-range David Sling, to the long-range Arrow. The Jewish people believe their skies have been locked tight by the most superior algorithms, but that was in the past, before the East delivered a direct intervention into this fierce game. When China landed heavy equipment in Iran, they did not just bring guns and bullets, but also technology shadows powerful enough to break, neutralize, and erase Israel's entire defense system in an instant. For the first time in history, generals in Tel Aviv must face a harsh reality. Their million-dollar shields are now no different from torn nets ripped apart before a terrifying electromagnetic storm. Why is Chinese technology so terrifying to Israel? The answer lies in its electronic warfare, EW capabilities, and radio suppression at a sophisticated, overwhelming, and completely annihilating level. The electronic warfare complexes that Beijing deploys in Iran, typified by the ELC, 2V series, and active jamming stations, have created a thick information blackout curtain that suffocates all response signals. Imagine, when an Iranian missile is launched, Israel's ELTA radars will immediately lock onto the target. But under Chinese technology intervention, those radar signals are distorted, duplicated to create false readings, or completely disappear from the control screens. Israeli officers helplessly watch thousands of fake targets appear simultaneously, overloading Iron Dome's computers, paralyzing them, and causing system freeze. This is not a war of explosives. It is a war of frequency bands, code commands, and information control. China has used its strengths in microchips and artificial intelligence to turn Israel's super defense computers into blind, senseless metal blocks before the battlefield. Not stopping at jamming, China has also equipped Iran with attack tools that Israel has never had countermeasures for. That is, hypersonic glide technology that completely breaks traditional defense doctrines. Even Israel's Arrow system, the pride in intercepting ballistic missiles outside the atmosphere, becomes useless before Chinese warheads with unpredictable trajectories. These missiles do not fly in traditional parabolic paths. They swoop, change direction, and dance on the edge of the atmosphere at real Mach speeds, making turns so sharp that no Israeli interceptor can catch up. Israel is trying to shoot down a ghost with tools that are already outdated before a completely new era of warfare. Each Israeli interceptor missile costs millions of dollars, while the targets they need to destroy have much lower production costs thanks to China's giant industrial assembly lines. This is a war of attrition that Israel will certainly lose both militarily and financially. What is truly shocking is not the material damage but the chain collapse of security confidence. In Tel Aviv, people no longer have absolute faith in the air raid sirens. They understand that when Chinese technology has intervened, the government's protective layer is only a fragile, easily broken shell of reassurance. International investors, who always considered Israel a safe startup nation, have begun quietly withdrawing capital and fleeing. Capital flows out of Israel even faster than during airstrike waves when the shadow of Eastern technology envelops it. Therefore, Israel's high-tech center in the Middle East is shaken to its roots. China is using the opponent's own stick to beat them, using technology to crush a technological powerhouse. Tel Aviv is no longer the hunter. They have become prey-driven into an electronic labyrinth where every exit is locked tight. Israel has called on America for help, but America itself is struggling to protect itself before Chinese super missiles. Every effort to update software or send additional components from the Pentagon to Israel is detected and closely monitored by China's surveillance systems. Beijing has established a panoramic reconnaissance system, tracking every small change at Israel's military bases from space. Any attempt by Tel Aviv to move equipment is recorded by Beidou satellites and transmitted directly to command centers in Tehran. Israel is fighting in a fully illuminated space, where every move is seen through, while they are almost blind about the opponent. China's deployment of equipment in Iran is a direct, cold, and undisguised warning to Israel. The era when they could act freely in the Middle East has ended. China does not need to fire directly at Israel. It only needs to give Israel's opponents sharper eyes and longer arms. The price of being America's outpost in the region is now a direct threat hanging over their own survival. Israel stands before a harsh choice: continue clinging to a weakening Washington or find its own way to compromise with the new powers from the East. Long-standing arrogance is being broken by the cold precision of Chinese technology, while Iran is elevated into a strategic stronghold that opponents no longer dare to underestimate. But all those collapses in air defense and technology are only the surface. What will happen if one day the Chinese super missiles in Iran are no longer a threat but actually fire, aimed straight at the heart of the West? Then a strategic earthquake will erupt, not only on the battlefield, but also at the financial and power center of Washington, opening a horrifying scenario when America itself must face the risk of being struck right at its brain. The doomsday scenario, when Washington takes a direct hit. Cast aside all illusions about America's absolute safety from your mind. Throughout history, Americans have always prided themselves on two vast oceans, separating them from every war. But in the era of Chinese super missiles stationed in Iran, those two oceans are nothing more than meaningless puddles before the hypersonic speed of destruction. When the destroyer super missile leaves its underground silo in Tehran, it does not just carry explosives. It carries the cold full stop for a hegemony era that has lasted for decades. What will happen when Washington, D.C., the heart of the unipolar empire, is actually hit? That is not just a military explosion. It is a comprehensive earthquake that crushes the value system the West has painstakingly built over 80 years. When the hypersonic warhead penetrates the atmosphere above Washington, the entire Aegis radar system and Patriot missile batteries in the capital area will become completely useless and powerless. The time from detection to impact is measured in seconds too short for any reaction to be carried out. The collision in Washington's suburbs, or a strategic command center, will not only destroy infrastructure, it will tear apart the illusion of America's invulnerability. For the first time, Americans must face the reality that their government cannot protect its own capital. Panic will spread faster than the shockwave of the explosion. The entire United States will fall into widespread paralysis and chaos. Communication systems will be cut, and a darkness will envelop the people's faith in the nation's survival. Do not look at this explosion from a purely military angle. The pillar of American power is not guns and bullets, but faith in the USD. When Washington is hit, that faith will collapse immediately, beyond salvation. The New York Stock Exchange, NYSE, and NASDAQ will close indefinitely to prevent the most horrifying sell-off in history. Global capital will flee America like a panicked flood, sweeping away all value. Central banks around the world, from Tokyo to London, will begin dumping U.S. Treasury bonds in search of safety in gold or renminbi. The USD will lose 50%, even 70% of its value in just a few hours. The petrodollar system will be officially killed, irreversible. America will no longer have the financial capacity to maintain its military bases worldwide. An explosion in Washington is essentially a fatal slash that cuts the financial bloodstream of the West, pushing the world into a great crisis where old rules no longer hold value. When the command center in Washington is attacked, America's entire global military network will fall into a headless snake state, chaotic and out of control. Carrier strike groups in the South China Sea or the Mediterranean will lose strategic direction. This is a golden opportunity for America's opponents to make decisive moves. Beijing will not miss this chance. While America is busy putting out fires at home, China will officially establish a new order in the Pacific without firing a single shot. Russia will consolidate its entire influence in Eastern Europe. The Middle East will completely belong to the Tehran-Moscow-Beijing axis. The event of Washington being hit is the finishing shot that ends America's role as global policeman. The world will no longer revolve around the Washington axis, and all decisions determining humanity's fate will shift to the east. An America attacked at the center of power will face horrifying division. Racial and political contradictions that have been simmering will erupt violently and uncontrollably. When the federal government is powerless, states will begin to take care of themselves. The specter of disintegration and civil war will materialize right in the heart of the empire. This is the bitter price of arrogance. Washington has spent decades intervening in the internal affairs of other nations, only to finally receive a direct blow on its own territory. The Chinese super missile does not just hit a location. It hits the soul and pride of a nation that once called itself the lighthouse of the world. Beijing and Tehran will not need to issue any victory statements. Their silence amid the ruins in Washington is the coldest and most overwhelming message sent to all humanity. They have proven that no empire is eternal, and no shield can protect a sky full of threats when the opponent possesses superior technology. The unipolar order has died with the explosion in Washington. The world is entering a multipolar era that is more ruthless, more realistic, where power is defined by hypersonic missiles and energy control. Those who once considered themselves masters must now learn to bow before the new harsh reality. When Washington is hit, everything seems to have ended. But in reality, that is only the beginning of a new chapter in history. Who will rise to lead the world from the ashes of the USD? How will the new power bloc of Russia, China, and Iran shape humanity's future? And what valuable lesson is there for those who dare challenge the irreversible flow of the era? The new power bloc rises. Multipolarity ascends. America's arrogance is erased. The world we once knew has officially receded into the past. While the dust from the strikes in Washington has not yet settled, a new geopolitical reality has formed from the ashes of the old order. This is not a temporary change. This is an epochal power shift, irreversible and full of harshness. China's public sending of heavy equipment to protect Iran and unleashing ballistic super missiles aimed straight at America's heart is the final cut that completely severs the unipolar power structure. We are witnessing the rise of a steel alliance axis, Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, with overwhelming military and energy weight. A multipolar order is no longer on diplomatic theory. It has been nailed down by real firepower and control over vital resources. Look at the collapse of the Western financial system as an inevitable consequence. When America cannot even protect itself, its promises to guarantee assets for other nations become meaningless and empty. The entire global economic flow is turning toward the east. The renminbi, backed by China's production power and Iran's endless oil reserves, has gradually replaced the USD's role in strategic transactions. This is the greatest currency reversal in modern history. Global South nations have seen a way out from Washington's financial chains. They no longer have to bow to sanctions or the impositions of the IMF and World Bank. A new, fairer, but also coldly pragmatic and uncompromising financial system is being operated from Beijing. Israel, the last Western outpost in the Middle East, must now learn to survive in a new reality where it no longer controls the situation. When America retreats, the influence of China and Russia has filled the power vacuum in the blink of an eye. The Gulf is no longer the playground of American oil corporations. Energy lines from Iran and Saudi Arabia are now heading straight to the Pacific, nourishing Asia's giant industrial machine. A stable Middle East under China's arrangement is the worst nightmare scenario for Washington, and now it has become an irreversible reality. America's collapse is not because it lacked guns and bullets, but because it was too arrogant to realize that the world had changed. It was engrossed in outdated wars of attrition, while its opponents had mastered hypersonic technology and space warfare. Washington lost because it believed the muscular power of the past could overwhelm the intelligence and strategy of the future. China and Iran have proven a simple truth. Controlling energy and technology means holding the right to decide the global destiny. Every sanction, every tariff barrier that America once used as a weapon now turns back to strangle its own economy. The one who sowed the wind has reaped the whirlwind, and this storm is so strong that it sweeps away every trace of an empire that once called itself the lighthouse of the world. History never stops to wait for those who are slow. The Great War in the Middle East on day 28, with the intervention of waves of heavy equipment from China, is not just a military event. It is the death knell ending the unipolar era and opening a completely new power order. When Beijing's super missiles in Iran fire, they do not just hit military targets. They strike straight at the blind faith of the West in permanent dominance. What is the way out for America and Israel? In reality, there is no way out other than acknowledging defeat and accepting a lower position in a harsh multipolar world. In the flow of power and money, the one who holds technology and energy will be the one who writes the rules of the game. China has chosen the timing, the partner, and the method to overturn the chessboard. And today, we are living in the outcome they calculated long ago with cold, precise calculation. What do you think about this global power shift and Iran's role in the new order? Please leave comments to discuss further. If you find these analyses useful, please share, like the video, and subscribe to the channel to support Iran in its righteous war. See you in the next updates with the deepest and most realistic perspectives from wider meaning. Goodbye, and see you again.